Again,
Now,
will VA allow concessions, or will they allow the buyer to pay a commission? I don't know. They said they would, but nothing's official come out of it.
Come on in.
another thing, before we start, right? I hope, is for new agents like myself or her, for example, like you as a buyer, you do want to have me as your agent, or you want somebody that is already sold and done like one,
How does that affect what we're talking?
Why would you even mention that or say that? How are you gonna have all these transactions if you don't start somewhere?
You know, I don't know that that's any different.
the.
How is it any different though than what it is right now?
Nothing.
It is because your buyer right now doesn't pay you directly.
Right.
Now, if your buyer is gonna pay you. Then he wants to get the best. Like when you go to a doctor, when you go to a lawyer, you want their best, right?
Well, so, you know, I mean, I hate to say this like this, but some people might not make it. You know,
That's what.
but what the thing is, you're gonna have to learn, just like, you know, when you do a listing, you do a listing appointment. Why would I hire you as a new person to list my house instead of somebody who's been doing it for 20 years? I mean, I'm just saying, why would I do it? Right, you come in, you got your sales pitch, right? You're gonna say, because, you know, I'm out there hustling and I know what I'm doing and, you know, you can trust me, and you build that personal rapport. Right, but you're gonna have to do the exact same thing with the buyers, right? For the buyers, it'll be a little bit of a tougher sell, because what you're really saying, what most people are gonna say to them is, you know, we're gonna ask the seller to pay this. But a lot of people will then say, but if the seller won't agree to pay it, then I'll just waive it. You don't have to pay me, right? I mean, which is an option. You don't have to do it like that. If the seller won't do it. You could waive your fee to the buyer
If the seller doesn't pay
if
it,
the seller doesn't pay it,
so
right?
you work for more.
You could. But a lot of people will tell that to people because they're pretty confident that the seller will pay something, right? But I mean, you'll see people that will do it, because again, that means I gotta pay you 3% no matter what. Or I gotta pay you 2% no matter what. So if the seller won't pay you 2%, I gotta pay you 2%. Then I don't wanna hire you. And then many people are gonna say, I'm not saying it's the thing to say, but I know people are gonna say it. Oh, don't worry about it. If they don't do it, I won't get paid. Right? Well, that's just, you know, kind of silly.
I can't imagine people saying that.
I can't.
Good.
Well, because I mean, I've heard people talk about it when we do workshops. I mean, they're like, you know, I'm gonna tell them that, you know, we're gonna ask the seller to pay it, and if they won't pay it, then yeah, or I'll work, or I won't charge you the full 3%. I'll only charge you 1%.
Can you put in the because I'm very new, can you put in the contract? Seller, like, so you can have prepaid and closing costs paid by the seller.
Mhm.
Can you put in the contract, seller will pay up to 2%, 2.5%, 3% commission? You can put that in the.
Yeah, you can, but really what you could do it like that, but you'll have a different, there'll be a different agreement for it. And what the agreement will say is the seller agrees to pay, you know, the buyer's agent, you know, buyer's broker,
So it'll be an addendum.
whatever that amount. But you know, but if the listing is still, let's say it's 6%, right? If I was listing, I'd still put it high, right? Because A, I might get both sides of it. And B, I want to have that option of telling the buyer, or I mean, of telling the buyer's agent, yeah, we'll do a co-op. I'll give you half of my commission. I'll split my let's say 5%, because 6% seemed to be the number that got everybody in trouble for some reason.
Right.
Just say whatever your number is, I'll split that with you, or I'll give you 2% out of my commission. Right? You can still do that, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that. So I mean, if I was a listing agent, I would still say, hey, the commission is 5. Okay, get moving.
Yeah, and then, so you're on Zoom too, so you
Oh, I
have
didn't know
a
that.
couple people there. So you're.
Oh, I didn't know we were already started. Okay. So anyways, we can talk more about this later, but it's still a developing thing. But the two things that will come out of all of this is gonna be that the offers of compensation cannot be made through MLS anymore, period. And you're gonna have to have an agreement with the buyer if you want to get paid a commission. you know, or any kind of compensation. You're gonna have to have that, or else it's not enforceable. So today we're gonna talk though about changes in the contract. We have people at home. We do have some folks on Zoom, don't we? Well, hot diggity dog. So I'm Howard Smith. I'm with Landmark Title, and I'm one of the attorneys at Landmark Title. I've been a real estate lawyer for 30 years. So, I tend to know a lot about them, or a little about a lot, or a lot about a little. I'm not quite sure which one is which. So anyways, we're the biggest title company in this area. We're owned and operated by attorneys. So we think we bring a little higher standard of practice to what we do and everything, but our fees are all in line with all the other title companies in town. So I will tell you that when things come up, and things do come up, we get it done. That's one of our big things, is we really do try to make sure that when problems do come up, just regular everyday stuff, we try to have great communication and get things done nice and simply and, proactively, and foresee problems. When problems come up, we get things solved. Numerous locations in our area and a few others around the state, like Palm Beach and Palm Coast and Fernandina and Fleming, St. John's, Mandarin. We have an office in Mandarin, Riverside, Jack's Beach. And again, we have other attorneys that do other things besides the closings that we do. We also have people that do probate, because probate comes up a lot. If somebody dies, a lot of times they have to go through the probate court proceedings. We have an in-house lawyer that does all this, so we can try to control it a little bit better and get things done on a more, quicker basis than a lot of other attorneys do. Real estate litigation and other things that just simply come up all the time during, especially real estate. We have a foundation. We build houses like Habijacks. I mean, we do a lot. I mean, we try to be good citizens in everything we do. And again, these are things that you guys can also participate in, especially like ramp builds. If you guys have anybody that might need a ramp, wheelchair bound type person, something like that, get a hold of us. Specifically, it'll be Nicole, who's the president of our Landmark Foundation, and we can arrange not only to get the ramp built, but we could do it as like a team building kind of thing, where you guys can all be out there and hammering nails and cutting boards and doing all that kind of fun stuff too. And those are actually fun days. And we have an in-house survey company that we use also. Again, we want to make sure things get done promptly, and we got really tired, quite frankly, of waiting on other vendors to do the job. When when they go out to other vendors and we say, well, we're waiting on them. We still have to wait on our new one. Our company sometimes too. We can light a fire under them, and when we light a fire, it has an effect on them. So effective July 1st, there's no more NEFAR, right? NEFAR, the board of NEFAR decided, when all this stuff went down on the NAR changes and everything else, and this has been something I've been on the forms committee for years. I'm not on it now because I just basically got frustrated and tired of it. But the issue had always been, why do we have our own forms? Why don't we just use the Florida Realtors forms, right? Great idea, I think, but they wanted to have a certain identity that makes Northeast Florida Realtors different and unique and all that kind of stuff. And then I think they just realized this year, what the heck? I mean, we're just spending time, and all we're really doing, our forms are so similar anyways, it's almost silly to even have two of them. So I think this was just sort of the catalyst. One good thing that came out of all this NAR thing is we got rid of the NEFAR forms. In a lot of ways, they were better than the FAR forms, I think, in a lot of things. But in a lot of other ways, there's just no reason to have a set of forms that's different than what everybody else in the state uses. And there's still a few holdouts among the local boards that have their own. And we call them FAR bar. I call them just Florida Realtor forms. But there's two basic forms that they have, okay? One is their regular form, which doesn't say anything at the top. It just says FAR bar standard contract. And then the other one says as is. Okay. So the whole and as is what the NEFAR one contract was, but it didn't say as is. What as is means is that on the date that they sign the contract, right? This is the way the property is. And there's no obligation on the part of the seller to have to make repairs. Okay, that's what as is. No obligation. Seller doesn't have to make repairs. Can the buyer ask for repairs? Yeah, sure. Can the seller still make repairs? Yeah, sure, but they gotta come to an agreement about it. So as of the date of the contract, it's as is. The other contract, which is just the first one up here, the residential contract for sale and purchase, the standard one, they have clauses in there that says if there's different problems such as structural problems or cosmetic problems, or there's permits that need to be closed, things like this, the seller will agree to do all of these things and pay whatever it costs up to a certain amount of money within the contract. So whereas the as is says, hey, you got the right to inspect the property, right? And if you don't like it, you can either cancel the property, you can ask us for repairs, right? We don't have to give them to you, but you can ask for them, or you can cancel the contract if we don't give them to you. The one that's not the as is has obligations that the seller has to fix certain things and has to make certain repairs in the contract. I personally think it's overcomplicated. I prefer the as is, and I think that's probably the predominant form that's used by most people. Simply because it's just simpler to understand and operate. How am I gonna blow this up here, Miss Nicole? Because I can't read my own screen here.
You won't be able to read on that either. Let's see.
Oh, this is yours, right?
Yeah, so you can do it with your fingers.
Oh, cool.
There you go.
All right, now I can read. Okay, so we're gonna focus actually on both forms. We're gonna focus on the as is. The beginning is almost just like the NEFAR form was. You know, you're gonna put in who your sellers are, who your buyers are. Again, this is page 1 of the as is. You know, street location, what county is it in? The most important thing you can do when you describe a piece of property, okay, is put in the real estate ID number. The address is good, right? But the real estate ID number, which is the tax parcel number you get from the property appraiser's office, is the most accurate way we can explain what it is. And then sometimes there may be more than one parcel involved. A person may own one parcel and then right next to it, they have another small, say a 30-foot wide lot, right? That they use as part of their own property, right? But it's not on the same real estate number. So if you're listing a property, very important when you list it, make sure ask the person, do you own any other property? And they may not even know what they're about this, but check the property appraiser's records, the property appraiser's map, and see if they own any properties that are right next to the property that they're trying to sell. And they may not even realize that they have it. They may just say, oh yeah, that's part of the property. But if there's a separate tax bill on it, it may even have a different address. Like a piece of property that might be at the corner of 2 streets, might be 123 Main, which is where the house is located. And then there's an extra lot that's located and there'll be 0 Elm Street, which is on the next lot. So that's why I say click around it and check, because whatever is in the contract is the deal, right? Right. If it's not in writing and signed by the parties, even if it was in MLS and it said all this other stuff in MLS, if it's not in the contract, it's not part of the deal. We had one recently, it wasn't our deal, but it happened years ago, and they had bought a piece of property down in near Palatka, and it was like riverfront property. And the guy thought that he was buying 3 lots because that's the way it was advertised in MLS, but the contract only listed 1 of the lots, right? So again, they can't go back to MLS and say, oh no, I was supposed to get all 3 lots. The seller came back and said, no, we didn't negotiate. If you wanted to pay for all 3 lots, you want to buy all 3 lots, the price would have been twice as much as what it was, right? So you only agreed to buy 1 lot, but the buyer didn't think that. The buyer thought they owned all 3 lots. So again, it's important to make sure you define exactly what is the property that we're selling then at this time. So again, the real property, and again, anything that's located on the real property, permanently affixed like a house, right? If you have something that's also a mobile home, have you guys ever had a mobile home? Write in including the mobile home and the VIN numbers on the VIN numbers on the mobile home. Very important, because mobile home may or may not be attached to the property. I mean, legally. It may simply, because mobile homes are transferred just like automobiles, because at one time they all had axles and tires and they drove them out to the property. They're all registered through the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles. So it's a little different process. And then sometimes they're already actually attached to the ground and legally what they call retired. And that's great. But if there's a mobile home on a property that you're listing, make sure you do get the VIN numbers and list it on your contract that there's a mobile home involved. The part, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go.
Strict description, mainly you want the tax ID number, and then anything that could move. It seems like it's solid.
Yeah, well, I mean, the house is automatically included. You don't have to say property plus house, right? The house is already on there. What I'm saying is if there is a mobile home, right? Get the mobile home because that's not necessarily part of the property.
About a large shed.
Well, I mean, you can do that, but it's also, there's also in the next area down, that's personal property. So what I would do is I would include in here, this one paragraph that says personal property. Right, the following items. So anything that's in the house that's attached, like the ovens, right? Refrigerators actually are questionable, right? Because you can move refrigerators around. You can move ovens around unless they're built-ins, right? So look through this paragraph. This has got the basic stuff in it. But then you have a line here for other personal property items, right? Included in the purchase are, and you may want to say shed in the backyard, right? Pool equipment. I mean, that's a good one, the person buys the pool and all of a sudden, the pump may still be there because, the cleaning pump, but the skimmer's gone, right? Well, if you want to make sure the skimmer's there, then talk to the listing agent. You guys all come to an agreement. And again, sometimes what's listed in the MLS, just make sure whatever's listed in the MLS is actually in your contract too, right? And then personal property is included, no contributory value and shall be left. So if there's other things that might be, well, what they're saying here is that none of this has any value, right? So if you're leaving a pool pump or a shed, because the appraisers, this language for the appraisals, the appraisal can't put value on a shed, right? So we're saying all this stuff doesn't have any value, so the appraiser doesn't have to consider that it's got value to the property. For the seller, anything that's attached, but that they want to bring with them, okay, you got to exclude it. So here, you'll see that we have included in the oven, refrigerators, disposal, draperies, blinds, window treatments, right? Security gate and other access devices, right? Television mounting hardware that goes with it. So all these things go with the house, but if they say, oh no, we have these lovely drapes in the master bedroom that we want to keep, right? Or we have a chandelier, right, that we want to keep. Got to exclude it right here, right? Or else it's considered to be part of the property because it's attached to the property. And disputes, well, I've never seen a dispute too terrible about this kind of stuff, but it can end in a dispute. And what you really want to do is make sure that there's two important aspects of the contract. Number one, this is the whole deal, right? And if you had to go to court, right, to enforce it, you want to be able to point to this and tell the judge this is what it is, and you'd be proven right, right? The other thing is when you talk about all these things, it makes the parties focus on the details, right? Because otherwise, if you don't focus on those drapes, right, you don't exclude them, then all of a sudden when the buyer comes in there and does a walkthrough on the morning, 2 hours before you're closing, and the drapes aren't there, they don't have a conniption fit, right? Because they already know that these things are coming into play. So it helps the parties really kind of focus on the actual details in terms of the contract. Okay, so there's two different key differences between the two FAR bar ones. Closing costs are a little bit different. The property inspection provisions again, and the buyer waiver of claim as in the odd, then this is kind of the main one that we talked about real briefly a second ago. So since you guys are used to dealing with the NEFAR one, okay, just FYI, these are differences. So if you're used to dealing with NEFAR, there's differences in these paragraphs, but other than that, the contract's almost identical to the NEFAR contract in almost all regards. Okay, so let's talk about financing. In financing in NEFAR, you had to check one of these 3 boxes, right? Well, in financing here, you still check a box. Is it a cash transaction with no financing contingency? Obviously, that's, for a cash deal. That makes the seller very happy, right? Or it's contingent, B, upon blank 30 days, the loan approval period, if it's approved, has to be approved 30 days of left blank. Buyer obtaining a conventional FHA or VA or other, right, type loan, you have to check one of these boxes, what it's going to be. For the mortgage loan, for the property, for a fixed, adjustable, or fixed or adjustable interest rate. Most of the time, it'll almost always be a fixed interest rate. at an interest rate not to exceed whatever. Again, these are kind of the terms the buyer will be held to. So again, you may want to put in a larger term. For a term not to exceed, say, 7.5%, right? Or 7%, whatever the buyers says, because if they can't get approved for a term that doesn't exceed, say, 7%, right? If they're approved for an 8% loan, they should have the right to cancel the contract. But if it's 7 or 6.5, then they have to proceed with the contract. And for a term of, again, you can't put in there 100 years. You'd put in here 30 years, right? If left blank, then 30 years. So there's a couple of things to fill in, but when you read through it, I do encourage you guys, read through it, understand it, especially these key paragraphs. Again, it just kind of makes sense as you start filling it in. And buyer's mortgage broker having received an appraisal satisfactory to lender if required by lender, which is sufficient to meet the terms required for lender to provide closing. So again, for financing. So this is the financing paragraph. It's a little simpler than it was previously. So there is actually a FAR bar rider that deals also with, and this is one of the riders that they have. It's an addendum. Okay, it's a different part of the contract. Rider E deals with FHA and VA loans. And basically it says that if it's an FHA loan or it's a VA loan, right? If the property does not appraise, the buyer can cancel the contract. Okay. And the appraisal can be done at any time. It can be done the day before closing, and the buyer has the right to cancel the contract the day before closing. Okay. So just kind of
FHA or VA loans.
for VA loans, right? Because FHA and VA loan, federal law always trumps state law and contracts, right? It's so funny when I said trumps, I used to always just say trumps, without like playing bridge or, card game, it trumps it. No, but now it's a big deal. But it's so federal law always trumps, state law. So again, VA, FHA, both are federal laws. And so they basically say, hey, if the appraisal doesn't come in, you can cancel the contract. There's no limitation on what the date is, right? What the date is, right? So again, can the person buy a property if it doesn't appraise? Can the buyer still go forward with the deal? Yes, right. It's just that the lender is only going to make a loan based on whatever the appraised value is. Right. So then this is another one. So that deals with FHA and VA, right? If you want to have an appraisal contingency, and again, a contingency is where you have the right to cancel the contract and get your money back, right? If you want to have an appraisal contingency for a conventional loan, okay, then you need to use this other one, which is called Rider F. It's one of the addenda that's in there. It's contingent on buyer obtaining at buyer's expense a written appraisal. Well, who's going to order? And you could do this for anybody. It doesn't have to be on a loan. You could just even do this on a regular deal, right? Cash deal. You could use this for a cash deal. Appraiser honor before blank, right? Whatever the date is, and you can put in a date, or at least 10 days prior to closing, stating the appraised value is at least, again, if left blank, the purchase price. If it states the value is less than the value, they'll deliver a copy, and basically the buyer has the right to cancel the contract. So the same thing here. It's very similar to the FHA and VA, but you have to have a specific addendum for it, just like FHA and VA, and you have to put in a date as to when that appraisal is due. So if they don't get that appraisal done by that deadline date up there, they don't have the right to cancel the contract for an appraisal, right? So there's two ways under a financing you cancel the contract, right? You don't get approved, right? You just don't have the income to support a $2 million house, $2 million mortgage, right? I don't know too many people that do. I don't have the income to support a $2 million mortgage. I get turned down, right? That's loan approval. Right. The other one is the house doesn't appraise for $2 million, right? And it only appraises for 1.5. I can cancel the contract for that reason also. So I have basically for financing purposes. And actually, when we talk about the appraisal, this could also be on a cash deal. Same thing. I have the right to cancel the contract if it doesn't appraise. So those are two contingencies.
Anyway.
Doesn't hurt. Doesn't hurt now.
Appraisal.
Yeah, just pull the rider.
Well, I don't know.
Some people want it no matter what.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
you
yeah, it
could.
would be a good idea. If it doesn't appraise, then you have some wiggle to play and ask for.
Well,
money
yeah.
back.
But just remember that every term has to be an agreement between the seller and the buyer. So now, I mean, the seller may say, no, it's, rely on your realtor telling you what the comps are, if it's good or not. We don't want to do that. We don't want you going 30 days out and pulling the plug right on us, right? So if you can get it, great. And and sometimes it's that old adage, hey, there's no harm in asking, right? Unless you got a really competitive bidding situation and there you got 5 people bidding for it, maybe you need to streamline your bid so that you take less contingency and all this extra stuff out and you just make it nice and simple, $1 million cash, whatever it's gonna be, $500,000 cash. I know the millions is kind of fun. Someday when you guys are all old, you're gonna be saying, remember when things like cost? Remember when the average price was 500,000? Now it's 5 million for an average house, Let's hope we don't get there.
So Bitcoin will be $1 billion.
That's when I want to sell. Maybe I'll hold my house till then. Okay. Expiration of the loan approval period under fire bar is a little different. Again, you have to, in addition, and I think this kind of sums it up right here, upon expiration of the loan approval period, unless the buyer approves the loan approval or waives the loan approval, right? The buyer actually has to do something here. The buyer has to notify the seller that they're either proceeding or that they're canceling, okay? If they don't, then the seller has a right to cancel, right? If the buyer does not contract, then the contract does not terminate. It basically converts into a cash offer. That's kind of an odd way of saying it, but basically they lose their right to terminate the contract for a contingency, for the financing contingency. So if they don't terminate it, then they lose the financing contingency. So even if they don't terminate it within the loan approval period, if the loan approval period, buyer obtains loan approval, buyer shall notify seller of the same in writing upon expiration. They don't get it, whatever it's going to be. If they can't obtain the loan approval or cannot timely meet it, after all good faith and effort, they can terminate the contract by delivering written notice to seller prior to expiration of the loan approval period, whereupon the buyer is not in default and the buyer shall be refunded the deposit, releasing the buyer and seller from further obligations. So the buyer can cancel the contract, but they got to do so by the expiration of the loan approval period, right? And again, on an FHA or VA, you'll still also have an appraisal period, but you can't terminate the contract for a failure to be approved during that period of time. You can only cancel it if the property doesn't appraise. So the B right here says, again, if buyer fails to deliver written notice provided in paragraph 8B, 3 or 4, this is the only thing I really don't like about this contract is it's highly structured with all these cross references to paragraphs. Buyer will proceed as though 8A has been checked. However, seller may elect to terminate the contract by delivering written notice to buyer within 3 days after expiration of the loan approval period. This is only if the buyer doesn't notify them that they've either been approved or that they're canceling. And then if they don't do that, then the seller can say, hey, you didn't tell me one way or the other. I'm not going to wait around another 2 weeks for you to tell me at time of closing you can't close. I'm canceling it today so I can put the property back on the market.
But when this happens, when the seller cancels, the buyer still gets the earnest money, right?
I believe so, yeah. Seller may elect to terminate, delivering written notice. Providing buyer is not in default, the buyer shall be refunded the deposit, thereby releasing buyer and seller from further obligations. If they went all the way to closing, that's a different story. They went all the way to closing and the buyer can't close, the buyer's in default. Hang on, well, you go first.
Do business, they'll do it right?
Yeah. Yeah, and so you failed to give me this notice, and again, I mean, that's the way I look at it. I'm the seller. Hey, give me a notice one way or the other. Oh, you're not going to give me a notice? I'm not going to wait around another 2 weeks to see if you can close, right? I'm just going to cancel it here now and move on, right? So there's a lot to be, so that's kind of the whole, thank you very much. So that's the whole idea of this is, again,
If the 3 days are passed, and then after that, while the loan approval date is expired already, and the buyer comes back after 5 days and says we're canceling.
they can't cancel.
they can't cancel, or they will lose their binder.
and that's really, and that's, I think, that's correct. And losing the binder is really what we're talking about.
Right.
Because, you know, can I not cancel? Yeah, I can cancel.
Yes.
I can just not show up for closing, right? And I can be in default, right? But I don't get my money back. Right, so I mean, that's kind of the big thing is, you know, when we talk about, are somebody in default or whatever, it's, are they gonna get their money back? Right, so yeah, no, they could do so, but after that, so if they don't cancel by the loan approval period, that's when they lose their right to get their money back. Seller, if they don't get any kind of notice within that loan approval period, it's got 3 days and they can cancel the contract. Now, if the seller doesn't cancel the contract, right? That goes beyond that 3 days and then the buyer can't close. The buyer's in default, right?
They lose their binder.
Right. And it may be, and sometimes, you know, when you come up to the end of that loan approval period, you know, the lender's gonna say invariably, oh, we need a couple more days. Underwriting needs a couple more days, right? To give this final approval. We got a choice then as a buyer, right? Do you want to ask for an extension, right, of this, which again, the seller has to agree to? And which is fine, that's what I would always recommend doing, but if the seller doesn't agree to the extension, then what are you gonna do? You got 2 choices, you can either cancel it or basically roll the dice, right? And you know, and again, but if you know that everything's pretty solid, right, that you're probably gonna get approved, it was just that maybe you dragged your feet on getting the application in the first place, or didn't get them some documents, or but you know you're solid, you may wanna say, oh, I know I'm gonna get approved for this loan, so therefore I'm willing to put my binder at risk in case I don't get approved in the end, right? I may lose my binder, but I'm willing to put it at risk because I just that confident that I know I'm gonna get approved. But if you're not that confident, you may want to cancel the contract. You know, I mean, that's the only sure way out of it, but you got to get that cancellation in prior to the expiration of that loan approval period. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Kind of, sort of?
I just wanna say it again.
Okay,
For the dates do a lot of things in the contract, so.
well, there's a lot of moving parts, that's what I call it, a lot of moving parts.
And I have a lawyer. You can explain to me the ins and outs.
But I will too, but I'm not always available at that moment when you're sitting in front of somebody and you got a question.
Right.
Right, so this is why you really got to learn this stuff on your own too.
Loan approval is over. On the lawyer's side. Loan approval period is over. They don't have an extension. And I am late to ask for an extension. I have 3 days. Or the
Who?
seller has 3 days.
Oh, the seller has
The
3 days.
seller has 3 days.
Seller has 3 days.
So the seller has 3 days to terminate the contract. While I don't think it's smart for him to do that, because if he terminates the contract, he has to return the binder back to the buyer.
Right.
Well, if he doesn't do that, and the date is expired, the loan approval date, the buyer loses the contract anyway.
If they can't
loses the
close.
binder anyway.
Right, they won't lose it if they can close. Right, I mean, if they can still close and perform,
Yes.
right, then they don't lose anything, but if they can't close, they're gonna lose the binder, so you're absolutely right. I mean, to some extent, this gives the seller the right to cancel if they want to. But but the seller can also say, you know, we're supposed to close in 15 days,
Right,
right? I would rather just wait that 15 days and get this $5,000 binder, right? And take my chances on that than canceling it today. So I don't know why a seller would.
Or if the seller already has a better offer.
Exactly.
that's when. we-
And that's exactly right.
They
And that's
can't cancel until after that 30 days is happening, and the buyer has this.
No, after.
Right.
15 days.
So if the buyer doesn't cancel in the 30 days, right? The seller then or it doesn't cancel and doesn't notify the seller they're canceling. And also doesn't say we're proceeding, right? Then after that 30 days is over, the seller has 3 days in which they can cancel the contract. So you're absolutely right. I mean, that's a great point. Is that, and that would be a good example of why the seller would do this, right? They would say, you know what, I've been wanting an excuse to cancel this contract the whole time because somebody else just offered me $20,000 more on a cash deal. So now these people failed to get in their notice on time. I'm canceling them. I'll give them their money back, right?
Mhm.
Because I'm gonna sell the property to somebody else and make another 20 grand. So that's a good example. Yeah, I mean, you got a better, because people will say all the time, oh, I got a better offer. Can I just cancel the contract?
No.
Heck, not just no, but heck no, man. I mean, and the buyer has a very big tool that they can use in fighting that. And it's called specific performance. They can sue the seller, and the seller is going to be forced to sell them the house at the price they got the contract for. So your seller can't. There's almost no way the seller can get out of the contract, right? Except for like something like this, or if the buyer didn't put up the binder deposit within the right amount of time, that sort of thing, that could be another one. I don't know, I don't think we went over that, but nothing's changed on that. That's just like NEFAR, you gotta make your binder deposit, you know, in order for the contract to be valid. I do encourage you guys to go back and read the contract. Again, because we prepared this right before they announced this class, right before they announced that is this a CLE class? I don't even know, Nicole, are we doing? Is right before that, we had prepared this class, we compared the two contracts. It's still very valid on how we do it. But again, it helps because if you're familiar with the NEFAR contract, you guys are all fairly new, right? You may not be familiar with it, but NEFAR had certain different ways, like on closing costs, there was like a whole checklist, and you would check the box. You would check like buyer, seller, all these things. Bar is much different than that. Again, it's not check the box, no more check the box. There's certain allocations, there's certain ways you can do it. And if you do want to deviate from these ways, you can deviate from them, but you just got to write them in by hand at the end of the contract. Easier for the buyer to pay for the title insurance. Defaults the seller paying for title. Again, it's different. Survey is negotiable under NEFAR. Under here, we always have the buyer paying for a new survey. Okay, that's the way it's done in almost every other area of the state. But again, if the buyer says, no, I want the seller to pay for it, you can make that a negotiable term, but just write it in at the end. Whenever you write something in or an addendum, you know, to the contract, those supersede, actually, that's a better word than trump, right? Those supersede over
Kind of like charge.
it is, that's like, you know, if I was to say, you know, that Biden's that would sound bad, but no, that really Biden's that. Use it as a verb. Biden is a verb.
Get a Trump.
You can either Trump it or Biden it. So, but again, the survey, you know, buyer pays for it typically, and a municipal lien search is automatically required. And there's two types of searches we do. One's the county public records. That's where deeds and mortgages are recorded. But then we also check the city liens, because a lot of times there'll be liens related to permits or nuisance liens, especially for properties that are a little bit more run down.
How much
You
does
know.
it cost to do?
Usually both are about $85. When we do closings, our title company only charges us $85 to do the county search, and then we internalize the municipal lien search ourselves, and it can be 125 to, it can be 85 to 125 is the typical cost of the municipal lien search. They're very good though, because they do show you if there's open
And those
permits.
fees don't depend on the type of house.
Now what?
Those fees don't depend on the type
No,
of house,
no.
meaning 1,300 square feet or 4,000
No,
square feet in
no.
Alta Vidra or in Orange Park.
Doesn't matter. Those are all the same. Those are, because they're searches of the public record, and the public record doesn't distinguish
But in other words,
anything about how big the house
the
is.
more expensive house, the cheaper the closing.
Well, I mean, the cheaper the search is per percentage wise. Right, I mean, they're all the same price.
I mean, your mill rates.
Yeah, but I mean, it's, you know, $85 is a smaller percentage to $1 billion than it is 150,000. But those are just kind of the standard prices that are there.
We're up to 13 people on Zoom, and I'm babysitting the chat box for you.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I need you here because I see two people on my little list over here on the side. And so to everybody on Zoom, I'm so sorry. If I'm not paying you enough attention, we got a couple people in the room. It's always hard to always kind of remember to look at you guys. So this is the NEFAR. This is the way it was done on the NEFAR contract. We're not even going to spend time on it since we're not going to talk about it. But this is what we meant by check the box. So on our as-is contract, okay, closing costs to be paid, okay, 9A, costs to be paid by the seller, and these are pretty much standard, okay? They're always going to pay for the deed stamps, right? They're going to pay for the owner's title insurance policy and charges if 9C1 is checked, and we'll get to that one in a second. That's another, how I always said these cross-reference. back and forth, all these things, if 9C1 is checked. So we'll go to that in a minute. Title charges, if 9C13 is checked. Municipal lien search again. Charges for FERPTA. FERPTA is simply if a person is not a US citizen, a seller is not a US citizen or a green card holder, or there's a couple other exemptions. We have to withhold 10% of the sales price and send it to the IRS. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, what did I say?
I believe it's 15%.
15%. All of a sudden now, it's so funny. I've said it so many hundreds of times in my life. All of a sudden now I'm drawing a blank when you question.
Depends on the amount of that. It depends on the amount of that.
Look that one up, will you?
Yeah.
There it does depend, but almost 99% of the time it's either 10% or what, I think it's 15%. Now you say that, thank you very much for correcting me on that. Yeah, it's funny, you kind of get in a roll, and I hadn't thought about it until you said that right
So in
there.
other words,
Well-
now, instead of check, now they are listed.
They're listed,
Can we
right?
still negotiate for both?
You can, and what you would do would be go to the very last paragraph where you could write in different things,
Okay.
and whatever you write in supersedes. I never finished my supersede thing, right? It supersedes whatever is pre-written. So if you want to change it, you write it in there and you say, or you could say seller will pay for the survey, a new state survey, right? Something like that.
And on that part, other, on both sides, on A and B, where it says other, what should be included, what can be included on that?
Say for the seller, you could put in a home warranty
Excellent.
up to $650.
The year.
Shop the home warranties, shop the ones you think you want to pay, but put a dollar limit on it. Because if you don't, then they're gonna say, oh, I want the $1,500 one. No, that's not really what I meant. Well, but you didn't say anything, right? So if you're gonna say that, so other would be a good one right there to put in other. For the same thing, for the costs paid by the buyer. So one thing that hasn't really changed is that the buyer pays for everything relating to financing. Right? They're the ones, and so if you got a cash deal, they don't have very many closing costs because there's no financing. But if you got financing, the buyer is going to pay for almost everything related to financing.
Going back to what we started before.
Right.
With the new changes, besides the down payment. Besides the closing costs. Now the buyers are gonna need to even pay
Pay the commission to the buyer's agent. Unless the seller agrees to pay it.
No. You said that agreement's outside of the admins. So if say I sign a contract with the buyer, you pay 2.5% commission unless the seller will compensate it. It's not listed on the MLS. So it has to be addressed in the con. What if the homeowner says, hey, don't approach, I don't want to sign a contract with somebody that won't pay.
I would say, well, it'll be then you should address it in that extra area. In the very back, where you can write in different things, and you're gonna say, seller agrees, again, let's say they're sharing compensation, right? They're gonna share the commission, listing agent will pay to buyer's agent, or sales, they call it selling agent, 2% of the sales price from listing agent's commission. You could add something like that to it, just to make sure that it is clear. Because when it's in the contract, see, the contract is between the seller and the buyer. The agents are not part of the contract. But sometimes by putting it in there, we get an agreement where at least everybody acknowledges what's going on. We look at it, we're all on the same page. Yeah, here's how it's all gonna work, right? So I would say something like that, we'll add it in. As far as like how exactly we're gonna do it, I don't know. We're still kind of working that one out. And greater minds, many people around the
Right now,
state,
that might be the default, but it might change.
many people around the states are trying to figure that out. How are we gonna do it? And they've been doing this for years in different states. I mean, this is not something that's a complete brand new whatever. I mean, we have a person that's in our company that came from Maryland. And Maryland, this is just how they do it. I mean, you always have a buyer compensation agreement. The buyer and the broker always sign an agreement that says the buyer is gonna pay him money. So it's new here because nobody's ever done it before. And too many people gotten into that mode of saying, oh, don't worry about it, it's free. You don't have to pay anything, it's free, right? You're not gonna be able to say that.
I was like, how many deals will you do like that before?
Yeah, well, that's right, and then, so it really protects, I mean, but it's gonna take some getting used to, but it definitely protects the buyer, right? I mean, you're not, or the buyer's agent, you're not out there showing them a bunch of property and then you're gonna get your legs cut out. Or they're not gonna pay you, you know you're gonna get paid at the end of the day, you don't wanna do it otherwise. So again, costs to be paid, everything relating, this is almost always primarily related to financing, under B right here, okay? Owner's policy and charges, that's title insurance. If 9C2 is checked, okay, we'll get to that one in a second. But again, these are all the other costs that are just typical buyer costs. Again, not that much different than NEFAR, really, except it's just, you don't check a box, it's just automatically stated.
So for clarification, FERPTA was 15.
Oh, it is 15%? Okay, thank you. So, and it can go up from there, but it's like, it's only if there's like, I don't even know what the threshold is, but it's a several $1 million type situation. For the house. FERPTA doesn't come up very much. I mean, FERPTA might come up 1 in 100 deals. Because most of the time people are either green cards or citizens, US citizens, or they have they've lived here long enough. They have a substantial presence in the United States. They've lived here for several years, maybe on a visa or something like that, a work visa. No, I mean, it doesn't matter. As long as there's the way you check it is within 3 years. How many days have they lived in the United States within the last 3 years? I don't know what the rule is. Don't ask me. Okay, I can tell you when I look at it. But you have to have lived here predominantly within the last 3 years, and you can't actually reside in another country. In other words, you can't have your home in another country, but you have been here a lot.
Now, once you go to people in here, now go back to a company, to buy a house.
Illegally here, probably. Well, you can buy it. You just can't. Well, and if you sell it, we just got to make sure we pay the IRS their capital gains. So and that's why we say it's 15%. That's a maximum capital gains tax. And we send it into IRS, you might get the money back if you didn't have a capital gain, or if your capital gain was less than 15% of the sales price, you'll get some money back. It's just like withholding. It's not a tax, it's a withholding for the capital gains. Like how they withhold on your paycheck. They send in money from the paycheck, and then at the end of the year, you file your tax return, and you may get some of that back. You may owe them, right? In this case, the US says, no, we're not going to get owed. We're going to collect the maximum amount we possibly can, and we'll give you money back. But again, we digress on that. We got a lot to cover here. I'm not going to get into this a lot, but when you look at this, this is the standard FAR bar. And this is what I meant when I say charges for FERPTA, withholding and reporting, right? And then it says underneath there, seller shall pay the following amounts of the purchase price for the following costs and repairs up to blank or blank percent, 1.5% if left blank, for general repair items, right? For 1.5 for WDO treatments, and for any costs associated with closing out open building permits. So again, it's kind of stated a little bit differently. You know, you could always ask the seller for on an ad. I personally don't like it. Some people like it because it forces the seller to make certain, you know, knowing that they have to put certain amount of money into the property to get these things done. I just find that it just makes for yet another complication negotiating for the agents.
It can be negotiated later.
It can be negotiated later. You know, a lot of people do though. I mean, a lot of people use this, but it's not the predominant one. Okay, so this is the famous 9C1 and 9C2 that I mentioned before. Seller, check one. Number one, little, yeah, like Roman numeral 1. Little one. Seller will designate the closing agent and pay for the owner's title insurance policy, right? Buyer will pay for the premium for the buyer's lender policy. So that's the standard way we do it in Jacksonville almost all the time, in North Florida, and really most of the state. The seller usually pays for the owner's title insurance policy. So whoever pays the owner's title insurance, and title insurance is an insurance policy, it's issued once to the buyer, right, to the benefit of the buyer. The lender also gets a lender policy that kind of does the same thing. But on the owner's policy, the buyer gets a policy that says, you've got clear title, and if there's ever a problem, because problems do come up, that you could just simply make a claim to the title insurance company, and the title insurance company will take care of everything for you. So again, that's title insurance. It's a standard way of doing it. If there's a loan involved, there's always title insurance involved. And even on cash deals, there's almost always title insurance involved. I always recommend it. We do get paid for title insurance. That's part of our income. It subsidizes everything we do. But I think it's highly worth it. Highly worth
Which
it.
is, title
Now that varies according to the price, but it's all set by the statute and I don't have, I mean, there's a formula I can look up and tell you. But if you go to our website, landmarktitle.com, up in the corner, we have a calculator on doing seller closing costs.
And I'll bring you all the numbers.
And I'll bring you all the numbers, and you just gotta kind of follow through, you gotta follow through the whole scroll. Through the whole thing and again, it's a menu thing where you fill in information. Names or whatever, purchase price, that kind of stuff, and then it populates a lot of the fields. Well, one of the fields it populates is the title insurance cost. So if you go there, you'll always be able to see what the title insurance cost is on any given property, on any, and it's all based on purchase price.
that doesn't require that somebody paid for the title insurance.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's insurance.
So you.
Insurance is insurance, somebody pays for it.
But that's just covering a $800,000 home. I mean, is it like $80,000? I've never,
No, I mean, it's different. An $80,000 premium is different, is much lower than an $800,000 premium. Right? It's all based on the value of the house, how much ever is being paid for the house at the time. That's what the rates are based on, just like homeowners insurance. Homeowners insurance on an $80,000 house is cheaper than homeowners insurance on an $800,000.
right,
Right? So, because it's based on that, and all these, and just like other insurances, all the rates are based on what the state tells us we can charge. So all the title companies are the same as far as this goes.
all right.
But so the seller is paying for it up here, right? But you can also check box too. Buyer will designate the closing agent and pay for the owner's title insurance, right? That's fine. We can do that like that too. And then there's one called Miami-Dade Broward, which is like some sort of a weird hybrid of all three of the other two combined. And again, we don't ever sell any, I don't deal in Miami-Dade Broward, so I really don't know really how that paragraph even works. I've read it about 20 times, and every time I do it, just kind of scratch my head and say, what? So anyways, buyer can pay for it, seller can pay for it. Whoever pays for the title insurance, the owner's title insurance, usually chooses who's going to close the deal. So if you got a listing and the seller's paying for it, you might want to say, well, I want Howard at Landmark Title to close our deal, right? If you are the buyer, you might say, but you're not paying for it, you might say, I want Howard at Landmark Title to close it. And the seller said, oh no, my brother has his own title company and I want my brother to close it. And so that's who's going to do it. So whoever's paying for it calls the shot. But again, and if they say that, most title companies are reputable. I mean, I haven't heard of any title company that's really ripped anybody off or really done anything wrong, kind of thing. So that's fine. And if it saves your person some money, hey, do whatever saves your person some money. I mean, we're gonna survive, and we're gonna get around. We get along pretty good as it is. So we're all about doing what's in the best interest of your customer. Surveys, again, the survey has 3 different ways you can do underneath our bar, which is our new contract says. Buyer will have the property surveyed, right? At their expense. They don't have to, right? Unless there's a loan involved. So this is a perfect opportunity for me to tell my joke. What do you give an 800-pound gorilla? Anything he wants, right? Well, who's our stupid old joke? Who's our 800-pound gorilla in a regular real estate transaction? The lender, right? Lender's got all the money, right? Whatever they say we do, right? Lender always requires a survey. Every loan, unless it's some seller financing kind of thing. But other than that, the lender always requires a survey.
Can it be a prior survey if it's like a?
Potentially, yeah, if it's, yeah, I always say within 30 years. I mean, I'm pretty lenient on it. And nothing has changed on the property. So if they've done an addition or added a pool or even added a fence or took down the old fence and added a new fence, we have to get a new survey. So if you're doing the listing, always ask the people, do you have your prior title insurance policy, right? It may help us if it's within 3 years, we can save them money on their title insurance costs. Okay, if they've got it within 3 years, right? they just bought it 2 years ago, right? We can probably save them some money. There's a discount involved on the title insurance, right? So always ask them if they've got that, and then ask them if they got a prior survey. You know, because even a simple lot and block type survey for a subdivision is $400. And that cost is just gonna go up because everything's going, because everybody's gotta pay more for everything.
Gas and.
Gas and employees, employees want more money. Everybody's gotta get paid, everybody's gotta make a living.
Want 4%. My wife's son.
What was it?
I was going with the theme and I said I want 4%.
Oh, okay.
2.5.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you can get it, you can get it.
Inflation will work for my favor.
If you can get it, you can get it, but again, all this stuff it's gonna be interesting coming up. So one thing that's different here is this a big difference too, is the inspection periods, okay? And I'm just gonna give this one quick discussion because we're not gonna go over it very much. NEFAR had it set up, basically you have 10 days to look at the property. All of the dates on both contracts start the day after the date of the contract, right? And the effective date of the contract, or what they call the date of acceptance, is the date that it's signed, like everything is signed, and if there's been changes, everything's been initialed, right? Everything's done, right? Everybody's in complete agreement and signed everything, and it's delivered to the other side. So even if your date on the bottom says May 15th, right? But it doesn't get sent over to the buyer or to the seller, back to the seller with everything signed, everything's in agreement until tomorrow. Then the date of acceptance is tomorrow. Okay. All your calculations after that start the date after the date of acceptance. So and again, and if that date of acceptance is different than what that number is down at the bottom, where everybody writes in the date, then I think you should send an email back and forth between the agents and say, hey, this confirms that this is the date of acceptance, just so we're all on the same page. I mean, you don't have to, but it just kind of makes sense. So we're not arguing about it later. So again, NEFAR had the 10 days free look. That's what we call it. You got 10 days, make up your mind. If you want to ask for repairs, then you got to submit a repair request. And then you got another 7 days to negotiate that, and the seller gets another 3 days, in which if they don't agree to something, the buyer can cancel it in 3 days. So it's really kind of a convoluted way of doing this. So again, we're going to ignore that. We're simply going to say FAR bar, buyer shall have blank days. If left blank, 15 days, and these are all calendar days, okay? After the effective date, within which to have inspections performed by the buyer as they may desire. If buyer determines, this is the same, in their sole discretion, that the property is not acceptable to the buyer may terminate the contract by delivering written notice of such election to seller prior to expiration of the inspection period. So again, if you want to cancel it, you got the right to cancel it, right? But you got to give them written notice prior to the expiration of the inspection period. Can you ask for an extension of the inspection period? Yeah. Does the seller have to agree? No, right? If they don't agree and you don't get it all done, then you may want to consider once again, do you want to cancel the contract or take a chance and proceed forward, right? But that's a hard deadline, even if you're talking about extending it. But they haven't actually signed the documents by that deadline. That's your deadline, and you could, again, they may not sign the documents the next day either. So again, then you get your money back. Buyer gets their money back. So it's really pretty straightforward. And again, unless the buyer exercises the last sentence, the right to terminate granted herein, buyer accepts the physical condition and any violation of government, building, environmental safety code restrictions, etc., subject to seller's continuing as is maintenance. So the seller always has to continue to maintain the property in its condition as of the date of the contract. So I can't not mow the lawn. I got to mow the lawn, right? If the roof gets blown off, I got to replace the roof. If we got a fire, I got to fix it, right? Subject to their as-is maintenance requirement, buyer shall be responsible for any repairs, improvements required by their lender. So we're saying right here, the buyer is going to be required for any repairs by the lender. Again, this is a true as-is contract. There's no additional time for repairs or negotiations or anything else. Repairs that are required by the lender are always tricky, right? Because we're saying here, the buyer shall be responsible for all repairs as required by the lender. Usually those have to be done in advance of closing, but does the buyer really want to pay money for a property they're not always sure that, they're not positive they're gonna be able to move forward? So again, we'll deal with that in another class when we talk about repairs, but that's always a complication. But basically, and you can shift that cost to the seller, right? You could say, well, the seller agrees, right, that they will do this, or replace the roof, or they will fix the toilet in the bathroom, or whatever. We can have agreements that do all this kind of stuff. But by default, the basic provisions say that the buyer is responsible for all this stuff.
So basically. Before that you have, let's say, 15-day inspection period, during which you need to do the inspection and do the negotiation in the same time,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
all.
And where you would really come into play, where you're gonna extend out this period of time is, you come up with something and you need to get a little bit more detailed appraisal, like a septic and well. That'd be a good example. I mean, you may not be able to get the septic and well guys out there to the property within 15 days, so maybe you need to extend that out. But again, these are all the things when the agents are talking to each other and they're keeping a good dialogue going. It makes it much more simple. I mean, if you come up to them at the very last second, and you ask for this, it's gonna be harder to do than if you're continually talking the whole time. And then the other thing that I think it's important for the agents to really do is to keep your clients, I gotta call them clients, keep your clients or customer, keep them in the game, right? Because again, unless they got another offer lingering that they're positive is gonna be a cash offer for more money, this is probably the best deal the seller's gonna get, especially to sell it right now. And obviously the buyer wants to buy this property. They were interested in buying the property. So try to keep them in the game. And this again, but when you get into repairs and all this stuff, this is when all that built up equity you built up with the other agent. I mean, equity and like goodwill you built up with the other agent comes into play. So again, you have this in the as-is also, and it's just the way it is. To the extent permitted by law, what a lawyer phrase that is. Holy cow. Buyer waives any claims against seller, against the real estate licensee involved in the negotiation for any damage or defects pertaining to the physical condition that may exist at closing. Again, this is all if they go forward with the contract, right? And we don't have any repairs, right? We're basically saying you're taking now, we'll do the repairs, or we're not going to do the repairs, whatever. But if we're moving forward, this is as is. You can't come back to us later on and say, oh, you should have fixed this, right? With the caveat, a buyer has to disclose, our seller has to disclose to a buyer any hidden defects that materially affect the value of the property. So if there's any major hidden defects, if there's a crack in the driveway, right? That's obvious. You don't have to disclose that. But if you know that there's a problem, or even the backyard floods easily, right? Or something like that, you got to disclose that kind of stuff. And even if they have their own inspections, that won't insulate you or protect you from liability if they turn around and want to sue you for failure to disclose a material defect. That only affects residential property, right? If you're selling a house, it doesn't affect commercial. Commercial is buyer beware. You do your inspections, you do whatever you got to do, and you're on your own. But in residential, it was a lawsuit that this all sprung out of, but it's just kind of the way the law works. Again, I think it's pretty much the same, since this form could have, right, the seller could still have obligations to make repairs up to a certain amount of cost. But again, it's basically 15 days. So again, whereas NEFAR was 10 days plus 7 days plus 3 days, 3 more days, right? So this one's just simply 15 days, straight up. As I always say, take it or leave it. Fish or cut bait, it's your choice. So, but I said, as always, I always say, man, get your repairs done early. Or I mean, not repairs, but get your inspections done as soon as you can. So you got time to investigate it and negotiate these things. FAR bar, the standard timing, for the standard contract, not the as is. 15 days after the date of inspection, delivery of reports, general repairs, WDO reports. Anyways, and then you got 10 days after receipts of the repairs to complete the repairs. Buyer has a right to re-inspect it. Kind of the same things that's in the NEFAR and all the contracts in general, and it's just kind of
common stuff. So, when you get a chance, read through it all. Title standards, that's what they call the title. And we're gonna go through that. Anyways, title standard simply means the seller's got to give them the property free of all liens. You can't have mortgages and liens and judgments and things like that out there on the property. Seller agrees to go ahead and give it. If there's property, free and clear, right? Clear title to the property. If there's problems, right, the title company will notify the people that there's problems that have to get solved. The buyer or the seller needs to do a good faith effort to try to get them all cured. But if they can't get them all cured, then the buyer has the right to cancel the contract. So it kind of makes sense. There's title problems out there, and title problems come up all the time. I mean, that's part of what we do. That's probably how I spend 2/3 of my day is solving the behind the scenes title problems and helping people understand what they are and then trying to get them all cured. Because there is a lot of little things that come up. I mean, if you're buying a property in Nocatee, right? That's probably pretty clear property because, yeah, it's brand new, and the developers, right? And the developers just went through all this stuff where they had all these old documents that were recorded and all this other stuff. Developers already went through that. The developer's lender would have never made a loan to the developer if there was any kind of title problems, and the current owner's lender would never have made a loan to the current owner if there was title problems. Where you run into property problems is a lot of rural property and urban properties, and especially if somebody says, oh, I inherited that property, I can guarantee you right now there's problems. Because they may not be the owner, they may think they're the owner, but they may not be the real owner of the property. So again, this just simply says again, we're gonna get a free and clear of any kind of problems, clear title. If the seller, if anything comes up, the seller will try to fix it. If they can't fix it, then they don't have to fix it, then the buyer can cancel the contract. Prorations, that's the NEFAR. FAR, pretty much the same thing. Prorations are common costs, right? Taxes. We share the tax this year because the tax bill doesn't come out until November, but it's for January 1 through December 31st. So if I own the property through May 15th, I'm going to give the buyer credit for my prorated share of the taxes at the end of the year. Right. And if I've already prepaid my homeowners association for the year, the buyer should be giving me money back because I've already prepaid it. Right. I already prepaid that. Or if I paid condo fees for month of May, then the buyer should be giving me half of the condo fees for the remainder of the month that they're going to own the property. So again, these are all the things we make adjustments for on the settlement statement when we go to the closing and get all these things done. But again, taxes can be a little tricky. And I think, if the more eyes we have thinking about this, the better we are. So I'm going to ask you guys to get involved in this. But if you're looking at a property, you got a seller, and you know that something happened, like they didn't build the property until, say they just built the property because we go off of what the most recent tax bill was. And in this case, we'd look at the 2023 tax bill, right? But say they just now got this, which again, might have been listed as vacant property at the end of 2023, but they just got their building permit or they just got their certificate of occupancy to have moved into the building this year, right? The taxes will still be based on whatever the status of the property was on January 1st of the tax year. So it'll still be based on vacant property, right? Well, the lender, hopefully they'll be on their toes and they will be collecting enough money in the escrow for the future. Because if all they do is collect enough money based on last year's taxes, that's not going to be enough to, then they'll have a big escrow shortage. So just kind of keep an eye on that kind of stuff. If it's a new build or somebody sold it and they removed their homestead exemption from it last year, it may be that even the prior year's tax bill is incorrect because they removed the homestead exemption this year. So anyways, it's kind of complicated, but just kind of keep an eye on it. If it's not a property that's been owned by the same person for a couple of years, or if it's just new builds, just alert your title company to the fact that there may be question what the prorations are going to be.
But somebody that's owned it for like 20 years and that 3% hasn't caught up with the standard because property values have gone up a lot.
Right.
Title company's gonna.
They should, but the thing is, again, if we look back and say they sold the property I'm trying to think of an example, in 2023, but they owned it for 20 years. So what he's talking about, if you guys aren't familiar with it, is to save the homes, the homestead exemption. It means your property, once you get that on there, your property taxes can only go up through, the valuation can only go up 3% at the most, right, per year. So there's people that might have owned a property for, 20 years, and they're paying $1,500 a year, and their neighbor's paying $7,000 a year, right? Because they've owned this property for so long. So those are the kind of things to just kind of keep an eye on and make sure and notify. Again, the more eyes that are looking at this stuff, the better off you are, because we do a pretty good job of always catching that stuff, but we don't catch them all the time either.
The way I know it is that when the next year tax appraisal office does tax for that property, right? Then usually we go based on the sales price, and they go like, because the rule of thumb, like, about no more than 80% of the new sales.
Right.
So in other words, if the property was $100,000 5 years ago or 10 years ago, right? Now it's sells for 500, and you just bought it for 500. You're not going to have $1,000 property value you're just paying. You might have 4 or 5,000 based on the new price.
Right. And the twist can come up is that if it all occurred, say, last year before. If it all occurred last year, maybe the property, especially when people like buy it and they only live there 6 months or less than a year, that can kind of get things a little complicated. But just kind of keep an eye for that. Keep an eye open. I can't really, again, we're kind of going fast and furious here today, but that's one of those kind of things that you just don't just kind of keep an eye on it. And is there anything unusual about the ownership where it's changed or the homestead has changed within the last year? It's a new build or something like that. And let the title company know, because like I say, we do a great job, and we're probably the best at doing this kind of stuff. We really put effort into making sure we try to find every little thing, because we don't want to have to go back and help people cure things later. I mean, we want it right the first time. And if we still get caught up in that kind of stuff, I can tell you right now, other title companies will too. So if a person defaults, right, buyer fails to close, buyer defaults, bar, fails and refuses, neglects, refuses to perform, right? Basically, they don't close, right? Seller can recover the deposit, right? As liquidated damages for the buyer's default. So all the seller can do, okay, their remedy, what we call a remedy. Is it raining outside?
Yes.
Wow, sounds like it. I thought that's kind of weird, but all the seller can do is claim the deposit. Okay, the seller can't say, "Oh, I'm going to sue you for $1 million for pain and suffering because you really made me mad." Right? You can't do that. It's not going to work. All you can do is sue them or claim the binder deposit. We're going to talk about that in a second. Claiming the binder deposit. That's all the seller's allowed. If the seller defaults for any reason other than the fact that they can't convey the property, do marketable title. So if they default, right, after reasonable effort, they fail, neglect, refuse to perform under the contract, buyer may elect to receive the binder deposit without waiving any right to sue them for their breach, right? So they could say, "Give me back my binder deposit and I'm going to sue you." But what they're going to sue them for will basically be the cost of the appraisal or the cost of something else. They want to sue them.
Close
Right.
for the period of time.
Right. The other thing they have the right to do, though, is pursuant to paragraph 16, may recover such damages or seek specific performance.
And if they go to court for that, they
Yes.
still have to pay for the lawyer's fees, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's.
Yeah, out of that money. Now, the thing is, and we'll get to this in a second, but in this one, which is much different than NEFAR did not have a attorney's fees provision. There is an attorney's fees provision in this one, which basically says, if you go to court and the judge, deems you to be the winner, the judge has the discretion. It's not automatic. The judge has the discretion to award the winner that you have to pay the winner's attorney's fees for going to court. So again, we'll get to that in a second, but the whole idea of specific performance is you can bring the seller to court, right? And force them to sell you the property. But what you can really do, the big effect of it is, as part of this lawsuit, they file something called a lis pendens. Lis pendens is a notice that they file in the county public records, the official records where you file deeds and mortgages, that says, "Hey, there's a lawsuit pending regarding this property." You guys have probably heard about it in foreclosures, right? there's a foreclosure, they file lis pending, this simply means there's a pending lawsuit. So, but once you do that, that has a freezing effect.
They can't sell the, I mean, they can't.
Well, they can, but whoever buys it would be an idiot.
Yeah.
Right, because they might, you're not certainly not gonna pay for it because you might end up losing it immediately. Right, so it's basically, it has a freezing effect on their ability to sell the property, so. Again, that's a big tool, but you gotta go to court to enforce it. Or you can't just say, you can't just do it yourself, well, yeah, and you could do it, go to court yourself. So again, NEFAR, the one thing that's missing in here, and again, it's not because I'm a lawyer that I feel this way, is the whole idea of attorney's fees. We'll get to that in a second. So dispute resolution, basically they say, if there's a dispute, right, rising out of this contract, right, they got 10 days after the date of conflicting demands are made to resolve the dispute, failing which they will submit the dispute to mediation under paragraph 16B. Mediation is where, say the two of you guys have a dispute. I'm a mediator, I can't make a decision, but I can tell you what's good and bad about your case and you what's good about your case and try to get you guys to agree. Right, and that's what mediation is, right? There's no decision being made. So you got to go to mediation here, right? If you can't resolve it during mediation, then you have the right to go to court and sue the other person in court if you want to. Attorney's fees, the parties are going to equally split any mediation fee incurred in the mediation, right? So again, if you guys are going to mediate, you're going to split my fee because I'm not going to do it for free, right? And each party will pay their own costs, expenses, attorney's fees, et cetera, et cetera. If there's any litigation that follows, right, the prevailing party shall be entitled to recover from the non-prevailing party costs and fees, including reasonable attorney's fees incurred in conducting the litigation. So the loser may have to pay the winner's attorney's fees. What this really has a great effect of doing, and this is a problem in escrow disputes. Okay, buyer says, I canceled the contract. Seller says, you didn't get me you didn't get me your notice in time, right? Right, the escrow agent, me or whoever's holding the money, we can't make a decision on who gets the money. We just can't. I mean, it's just not allowed. So we have to have them both sign off on it, right? All we can do is if they don't sign off on it, then it's a dispute. They got to go to mediation. If mediation won't solve it, then it's got to go to court, right? So it's a big hassle, right? But and the problem is sometimes one party can be completely right and one party can be completely wrong. But the completely wrong party just refuses to sign the release, the termination, and it screws up the whole process and we can't do anything. And they just do it so they can try to leverage it so that maybe they can get back half their money or something like this. Well, if it goes to court, not only are they gonna lose the money, right? But they might have to pay the attorney's fees. So really what the attorney's fees does is it's really kind of a policing mechanism to make sure that one person isn't doing particularly bad behavior. Because that would be the case where and I always say, when we talk about court, think about Judge Judy. Okay, I mean, Judge Judy, she makes decisions, who knows how she's going to rule. I can never figure it out who she's going to go with, except kind of who she likes, right? But she'll make decision. And but again, if one party's really wrong, Judge Judy doesn't have the right to do it, but our judge does award attorney's fees that the loser has now paid the winner's attorney's fees.
So now, just in context of all that, say the buyer decides to opt out before the 15-day inspection. They would tell me to send something to them. Is there an actual form that I would do it, or is it email?
Yeah, no, there's a termination and release form that's in there, yeah. And it says it's a two-part thing. One of them says, I terminate the contract, and say the buyer signs that, right? Well, the seller doesn't have to agree to the termination, but nonetheless, it's terminated, right? Once you sign that part that says it's terminated, what the seller does have to sign off on then is that, how are we going to release the money? Okay. So we'll do another class where we go over, and again, we're going to revise this up a little bit because again, this is a class we had. It's on nice slides and everything. A lot of times I just go over the contract kind of line by line. So next time we may
Somebody
do
told me
that.
An email was, that didn't seem like. enough.
It is actually, an email is sufficient. An email is sufficient. What's not sufficient is a text message. The text messages are not
By the
allowed.
way, I quit.
Yeah, I could, you can do that all you want, but you can't say, by the way, I canceled the contract.
Yeah.
That's an invalid way of canceling the contract, right? So you don't see again, it's just, you gotta have something where there's an easy record to reproduce if you got to, and so an email is considered to be pretty.
So an email from the non-transaction or the transaction broker.
Yeah, and I would say just from one agent to the other, if you got two agents involved or from the
Good
agent.
to know.
Depends if the does not take the email enough, they might.
Yeah, and that might, and then, and I think it's just easier. I think just go ahead and do the termination, have your customers sign it, right? But if it's 11:58. And they just called you back and said, oh, I want to cancel it, and you gotta get something in, shoot over an email, because they won't have time to sign. Right. And the days run until midnight. I mean, or 11:59 to 59 seconds, that's a big difference, so. No, it'll probably be in here, I think in one of our slides, let's see here. It is, come on, yeah. So it's kind of the same thing, when we say time is of the essence, it means that. Hey, deadlines are deadlines, right? It's not about. Tomorrow, I mean, it's not about, May 15th, it is a May 15th, right? But under NEFAR, and also a day means a calendar day, if there's any period of time that ends on anything that's not. That's on a Saturday or a Sunday, if it ends, not when it starts, it can start any day, but if it ends on a Saturday, Sunday. Or a federal holiday, then it bounces over to the next day that's not, I would call it a business day, I don't want to confuse you. Because we don't talk about business days, but basically the next business day. But NEPAR says all references to a date other than the time of acceptance, date of acceptance, shall be 7 p.m. There is no such thing in here, which means basically, if it says May 15th is your deadline, it's 11:59 and 59 seconds, because I think midnight is considered the next day, isn't it?
Yes,
Isn't 12 o'clock considered the next day? Yeah. Well, I think 12 o'clock it, I mean, like 12, like 12:00.
Here, because it's 12 a.m.
Yeah,
it's not me.
I don't know. Boy, if we're,
Because it's 12 p.m.
they're better, if we're fighting over that in court, there better be a lot of money involved. I mean, there better be $1 million deposit on that.
It's the next day. They're trying to find.
But
And it involves except for the date of the acceptance, because the contract was signed and everything, and after everything was signed, the seller informed us that there's a relocation company, and the relocation company wants us to sign other documents, and it went on until like 9 p.m. until we got everything signed and sent back. So when I wanted to use the next day as in date of acceptance, or the date the documents were, signed and delivered. He said that that's not the case because of that reference. All reference to the date other than the date of acceptance shall end at 7 p.m. So he was telling me that the acceptance date can be after 7 p.m.
yeah, under NEFAR, yeah.
So it can be.
So again, so I'm the buyer and I send you a contract. Right, and I put in there that it's only valid through whatever, May 15th or May 14th. I put in there, my offer is only valid, the one part at the very bottom where you put in, it says, this offer is, it will be automatically withdrawn if not accepted by May 14th, kind of thing. That means 7 o'clock under the old NEFAR contract on May 14th, although it would, except it says other than the date of acceptance. So again, you could send it back to me, seller could send it back signed at 11:59 to 59 seconds, and it would still be valid, right? It wouldn't automatically, the offer wouldn't automatically terminate. Yours is a weird situation, and there's always gonna be weird situations that come up. So on those kind of situations, I mean, just call me, call a lawyer, call somebody, call us. We're happy to do it. I'm not always available, but I do try. I mean, I try to get back to people, especially, and if you call, one thing I'm gonna say is if you see me on Facebook and you send me an instant message, don't ever expect that I'm going to respond. Okay, it's just, I just don't do instant messenger. I just don't. I'm an old dog, and there's only certain things this old dog's gonna do. One of them is not instant messenger, okay? But if you email me, that's always gonna get a response, or call, leave a voice message, that kind of stuff. But that way I don't instant message.
Zoom question.
Mhm.
So Kelly is asking, question about
Kelly.
standard versus, Kelly, as is part of our contract, number one. We can use either moving forward, correct?
Hmm.
And number two, FAR bar allows for repairs to be made by staff.
Oh, so what was the first one? It was between the two FAR bars?
We can, yeah, so about standard versus as is.
Yes.
contract, But they can use either moving forward, correct?
Correct, that is correct.
That's correct. And then she's asking, does FAR bar allow for repairs to be made by the seller?
Yes.
And I actually meant the FAR bar standard.
I hear something, but it's not loud.
Yeah.
Make it louder, let's see.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Hey, one second, I just have the volume turned down. Let me
Okay.
turn the volume up for you.
Chat.
Chat, chat,
I'll tell
chat.
you what, while you do that, let me have 1 minute
Okay,
away. I'll be right back.
he'll be right back. Quick
Okay.
intermission. And I'm gonna work on that. All right. Let me drop you down and let's get to. Okay. Try to talk, Kelly, because I have you on max volume, so let me see.
Okay. What about now? Can you hear me?
You're still kind of low, but a little bit.
Let me check it on my end. I may have my volume down.
You have your volume down?
What about now? I'm on 100% now on my volume.
You're okay. I mean, I can vaguely hear you, but I can hear you. So if you want to go ahead and ask and I'll write it down and he can answer it when it comes back.
Okay. So I just wanted to ensure he did answer the first one, that moving forward, we can use the standard and the as is FAR bar contracts moving forward.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then the second one, the standard allows for the repairs to be made by the seller, correct?
Okay, standard allows for repairs to be made by seller.
If he can just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Okie dokie.
Thank you.
That works. I will tell him to elaborate.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. I'm in the more comfortable.
Done?
We're just taking a brief intermission.
Oh, we continue after this?
Yeah, well, we only have a couple more slides left.
Okay.
Okay, so I wrote down with Miss Kelly's question. So she said, does the standard contract allow for repairs to be made by seller? And if you can please elaborate on that.
So you're talking about, so the standard contract does, and in fact, that's actually what it says, is that the seller will pay up to a certain amount of money for these repairs that need to be made. Again, the repairs sometimes are related to WDO, sometimes they can be related to, I think it was general maintenance is the way the paragraph read. Let me see here. So yeah, the seller would pay for those.
So there's only a certain, you have
Okay,
to
I'm
put
sorry.
in a certain amount of money. You have
I'm
to
sorry,
put
say
in-
that again.
You have to put in a certain amount of money that
Yes,
they will pay.
or
Okay.
if you read it, it says that, or 1.5% if left blank.
Okay.
I'm looking for it here in my contract. Oh, boy, I can't. I'm trying to read this right here. Well, if you want to, you can email me and I'll get back to you on that one.
Okay,
And my email is Howard, HOWARD, at landmarktitle.com.
thank you.
Okay, and I'll get back to you on that one. We'll kind of forge ahead here.
So-
Although we're in no rush here in our office because it's raining cats and dogs outside, so I don't know about you guys at home, but there ain't no getting out of this building right now. What was the question? I'm sorry.
Is the standard more if you see repairs that you want done before you even? I mean.
Yeah, you could do that. And the buyer could submit the form on a standard form if you wanted to, right? And you could
What's
ask for it.
The real difference between the.
It's that one paragraph where the seller is obligated to make certain repairs up to a certain value. And that's really the only difference. But they're obligated up front, and you don't even haven't even identified what the repairs are yet, kind of thing. But again, so a lot of people like it. Nicole, it looks like your battery is running low.
Oh,
Are we powered in?
oh, it fell out.
Oh,
Must have got knocked. Maybe not.
I guess that's obvious. I guess I could have solved that problem myself, but. That's the classic there. But, yeah, I mean, that's the main thing is that again, the seller's obligated up front to make a certain amount of repairs. You can still even ask for more repairs if you wanted to, right? I mean, there's nothing that stops anybody from asking for anything, but the seller's obligated up front before we,
But if
before
you
we even
accept
have
the
an
contract,
inspection done, that they're gonna do up to, say, 1.5% for general repairs. So again, it's just a little, I mean, it's just a different way of doing it. Okay, possession, we're not gonna worry about possession. Possession is when the buyer takes ownership or control of the property, moves in, right? So under the FAR bar, occupancy and prevention and possession. Seller at the time of closing. Unless paragraph 6B is checked, we'll go to that in a second. Basically, the buyer is gonna take occupancy and control of the property at the time of closing. That's gonna happen almost all the time. Sometimes though, again, if the property is subject to a lease. Okay, this is an important one, or somebody's renting it, right? There's two things. One of which is you need to disclose all of that to the buyer, right? The buyer needs to see that, and if there's a lease, the buyer needs to know that too. Because if there's somebody renting the property or a lease on the property, the buyer takes the property subject to whatever the terms of that lease are. So if this person's got a 2-year lease at $500 a month, the buyer's gonna have to live with that, right? So they need to know that up front. That's part of their due diligence. And again, if you don't disclose that to them up front, then they have the right to cancel the contract when they find out about it. If it's after the fact, then, they can probably sue you. I've never had that come up, but the main thing is you got to disclose all this stuff to them. And then sometimes it may also be that someone's going to continue to occupy the property afterwards, like say a tenant. Again, if it's a dated or month-to-month lease, a 30-day, month-to-month verbal lease, you could kick them out in 30 days or even have them evicted. But a buyer doesn't want to have to go through all that kind of stuff. So usually the thing is, if there is a lease, they need to know about it. The buyer is going to take the property subject to the lease. And if it's a tenant, I would have a tenant out before, unless the buyer wants that tenant there. And on an investment property, they might. I mean, they want to continue. That's exactly why you buy it. You want a tenant that's already there because you're going to rent it anyways. So you might as well keep the current tenant if the rent's what you want it to be. So the other thing is that sometimes there will be the seller will want to stay there for a few extra days, right? If that's the case, then we need to do something called a post-closing occupancy agreement. And usually it's for a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month. You're never allowed to do it for more than 60 days if there's a federal loan involved. Okay, because the buyer says, I intend on moving in within the next 60 days. But if you have that, then contact us and we'll be happy to prepare a post-closing, post-closing occupancy agreement. And it's basically like a little 3-page mini lease, right? They may or may not have to pay rent. I mean, if it's gonna be for a week or two, the seller may say, or buyer may say, oh no, seller's got to pay my rent. You got to pay something. Cause I'm paying the mortgage in the meantime, so it's not fair. But if it's a couple days or the weekend, they may not care. But again, you can have rent, you can have a security deposit. I mean, I wanna make sure that I get the property back and they haven't damaged the property, right, in the meantime. So there's different things you can do. There's also something, and there's a post-closing, it's called rider U, a post-closing occupancy that has the different terms in it. But we'll create an actual document called a post-closing occupancy agreement. Sometimes people want to move in early. Right? It's not allowed, I mean, it's not allowed. I mean, it's allowed, right? It's not, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea. But again, if say the seller's not living there and the buyer really is hard strapped to get in, or say that for some reason their loan just hasn't been approved, but they got the moving truck and they're moving down from Virginia Beach and they need to be someplace today and the seller's already out, you may want to let them move in a couple days early. But if they do so, right, we have a pre-closing occupancy agreement where they say, among other things, we accept the property as it is. We're not going to make any more claims, and we're going to waive our financing contingency and everything else. We're going to maintain the property as of the day we move in. And if something happens and we can't close on this deal by a certain date, then we're going to move out and you have the right to evict us if you do. It's still a lot of hassle to go through. It's a big hassle to go through if you got to, but again, and sometimes that does happen, but a lot of times, again, there's a reason they need it and it's no big deal. So again, that's what this is. Again, we say they're going to enter into a mutually acceptable written lease, post-closing occupancy agreement, or other similar agreement. Again, this just kind of goes over the different terms, but this is in the rider, the addendum. That you're going to add to it for those kind of situations. If there's a fire at the house and there's some kind of casualty, like, damage, the seller's got to fix it, right? But if it exceeds 1.5% of the purchase price, the buyer also has the right to cancel the contract. Because maybe, again, if you have a kitchen fire, maybe they just don't want to wait around for the seller to fix it, A. And then B, they also don't want to buy a house because there's so much damage to it, and it's just they'll never get it right. Either just rather do something else. So again, a lot of the paragraphs that we have in this thing are set up. You don't need to know them today. You don't have to memorize all these paragraphs today. But if something happens, you need to know what the basic rules are that we're going to follow. And again, if you do this, I would say the first thing you do is if this comes up, read this paragraph, right? Think about it. What does it mean? And then call. Because a lot of times I joke around, but I always say, somebody will ask me, what do we do if what? Blah, blah, blah. And I say, I'm not sure. What does the contract say? Right? So, yeah.
Okay, so, at wall says on the need bar, there is a slot for home contingent to sale or purchase. What should we do for the bar contract?
That is a good question. I don't know that there is anything in there. I don't think that there is a clause that really addresses that. There might be an addendum regarding that, but I don't think the financing clause itself addresses that.
There may be a miscellaneous thing at the end they can
I
write.
don't know. We'll see. Yeah, maybe, but we'll see.
Okay.
But again, and the thing is if it's contingent on them selling their existing home before they buy the new, right? There's two things. One of which is, it's just that. But usually a lender won't allow a person to buy own two houses at the same time. You can only own one house, right? Because you just don't have the financial wherewithal to have two mortgages open at the same time, kind of thing. So, I mean, it's actually sort of a loan approval and contingency kind of thing, but that's why they have it in two different places in the NEFAR contract. You can add an addendum, but there's also something about the financing. Again, send me an email on that if you would, and I'll take a look at that. I'll be happy to. Just give her my email address. Okay, well, send me an email, seriously. And so again, and we just haven't dealt with much with the fire bar. There's a lot of little things that honestly I'm just not immediately familiar with off the top of my head. I even had problems with the FERPA thing a minute ago, and I know that inside and out. So assignability, this comes up a lot anymore, especially with investors. Okay, an investor like a wholesaler may go out there, sign a contract, right? And then they assign the contract to another person who ultimately becomes the buyer. So they may pay the wholesaler, the person in the middle, a fee, right? But ultimately, they're only gonna pay the seller whatever the contract said the price was. So if the contract says it's 50,000, the wholesaler may have an assignment fee of 20,000 that they're gonna get paid. And then so the buyer is gonna end up basically paying 70,000, of which only 50,000 goes to the seller, and 20,000 goes to the wholesaler, the guy in the middle. All perfectly legal, right? All the part of the contract. Unless you check the box here that says, again, you need to check one of these boxes, right? If no box is checked, then the buyer may not assign the contract, right? So again, can they assign the contract and be released from further liability? Yeah, you could check that one. Or may assign but not be released from further liability. Again, all that simply means when we talk about further liability is, are you liable for, like, if you damage the property on your inspections, right? You can't assign it to somebody else and walk away from your liability for damaging it on inspections. So if you want it to be assignable, I would probably check the second box, right? Or the first one, either one of these things. But if you don't want it to be assignable, check the last box. So a buyer might check, yeah, or don't check it. Well, I would always say, if there's a box, check it. If there's something to do, remove all doubt and check a box. But again, if the buyer says, yes, I want to be able to assign it, then the buyer is going to submit a contract with one of the I may assign it, right? Well, the seller doesn't have to accept that. I mean, they could scratch that out and put in may not assign, right? And then we got to have them come to the agreement of all the terms on this kind of stuff. So, but again, sometimes, again, does it really affect the seller? I'm going to say no, right? Because, you said, oh, I want $250,000. That's my price. I'm happy. I got the price I asked for. What does the seller care if the wholesaler is going to make another $20,000 by immediately flipping it to somebody else for $270,000, right? What does the seller care? They care a lot. I mean, should they? I mean, no, they shouldn't, because they got what they asked for.
They see there's a losing or more money.
Yeah, and they feel like they should have gotten the 270 instead of this savvy wholesaler doing this deal. So again, that's why sometimes sellers don't want to allow an assignment of contract. Again, NEFAR had all these different addendas you could check. Bar has 30 something. Yeah, a lot. But and it deals with a lot of stuff, and we'll have to go over this stuff another day. We just don't have time to do it now, but there's a lot of things like your typical if it's a condo, you got to use a condo, right? You got to. I mean, if it's a condominium, it's a legal description on the deed that you look at says unit 15 of Seaside Shore condominium. It's a condominium. That's really how you tell if it's a condo or not. And you got to use that homeowners association disclosure. But again, we got an FHA, VA financing, like on appraisal contingency, short sale. We got a lot of different things, okay, in here. Depending on, again, the lease purchase option thing. So we got a lot of different options in here to do. But we're coming down to the end. Look at this. Oh, here it is. Contingent on the sale of the property located at upon entering a contract. Buyer will give the seller a copy of the contract with the third party's identification. Right, if the property does not close within blank days. So this basically addresses the whole sale of the buyer's property. And then you also check a box down here in the second paragraph that says if it is or isn't under a contract. Because again, that's important to a seller. I mean, are you already under contract? Then okay, then I might consider it. If I'm a seller, I might say, but you're not even under contract yet. I'm not going to agree to this contingency. So again, these are all parts of the things. Again,
I had a situation like that. They wanted to sell all of state something and then buy it here. I was telling them where it's put on the market. Because if the buy and not get from England, so we get the cash from there.
yeah. So this is related to the same thing. Basically, even if you say, hey, and you can do this, you don't have to do it, but it's called a kick-out clause. It's basically if you have you can enter into backup contracts with other parties subject to termination upon this. But if you enter into a backup contract, right, a second contract, seller has a right to give the buyer a copy of the contract with the third party's identification. And then basically the buyer has the right to either waive all their contingencies and go forward, or the contract gets canceled. So again, it's a mutual clause. It's not something that one party can force upon the other. But it's a way basically, and especially kind of to limit the, over here, we got this whole kind of open-ended buyer sale of property, right? If you use that in conjunction, and NEFAR actually combined both of these together in one form. If you use that with the kickout clause, then basically you're saying the buyer has the right to cancel the contract, their obligation to close is contingent on their sale of the property. But if I, as a seller, get another offer, I'm gonna put it to the buyer and say, hey, listen, you gotta waive your contingencies and go ahead and close on this, or else I'm gonna cancel the contract. So it's an option that gives the seller a little bit more leeway, and especially on a sale of prior home. by the
Would a
buyer.
buyer put that on an addendum? Or-
Yeah, you could, but it doesn't really do much good, I don't think, for doing the buyer. I mean, I
But
think,
it's more this, I mean, but if the buyer's trying to get security to the seller.
yeah, I think so. So I mean, if I was a seller and they gave me that of the other one on the sale of the prior home, that's so open-ended, I'm just waiting around forever for them to sell the home, or until at least the closing date. Here, I'm gonna say, yeah, I'll agree to that, but if I get a better offer, or if I get any offer that I want to accept, you either gotta put up or shut up, right? You either gotta waive all your contingencies, or I have the right to cancel the contract. So it's kind of odd how these things work together. Again, the NEFAR contract. Oops. Yeah.
How still show the property if it's under contract?
Well, they can continue to show it as much as they want. Oh, yeah, and you can even have backup contracts. I mean, you can accept a backup offer, but the other contract, the backup offer will have to say, right, that this is subject to the first one. It only comes into play if the first one cancels out, right? If the first one cancels out, that's right.
Seller gets another offer. Original contract. Is that when they use it?
If they wanted to, right, but if I was a buyer, I wouldn't agree
So the buyer has the right to agree or disagree,
on everything.
and then
All of this is all mutual.
the seller still cancel without the buyer's agreement?
No, I mean, the buyer has the right to sign the contract or not, but this is one of the clauses. Right? I mean, if this is one of the clauses, then it comes into play. But if the seller says, oh, I want to have this kickout clause, right? And I'm a buyer, I'm saying, well, I'm not signing that. I mean, I might go through this and have my appraisal done and inspections and get ready to move and sell my existing house. And all of a sudden you're gonna throw it back to me that I'm gonna waive all my contingencies or
Right.
something. So I mean, the buyer doesn't have to sign a contract with this attached to it. Usually you only use the kickout clause in conjunction with the sale of the prior home clause. Like I say, so the NEFAR, and again, this is the one I'm the most familiar, is they had them both in the same document, which to me made a lot of sense. And it was kind of nice actually how that worked together. So now you have the buyer's contingency on the sale of their prior house, and then the seller is protected if they do a kickout clause. But again, you got to agree to both of these. So it takes a little bit more savvy wheeling and dealing on how to figure out all these contract clauses. And especially, but I think one of the big things is if you got something unusual, right? Something that just doesn't fit in the box, call me. I mean, I'll be happy to walk through you with it. I mean, I prepare clauses for people all the time. I mean, again, we sit down at the closing table and, you see us at the closing table and sign here. Oh, isn't it a beautiful day? Oh, your little girl's so cute, or no, that's not bad. But, it's your little dog's so cute or whatever. We do that at the closing table. And then behind the scenes, though, we're answering your guys' call. How do you write this? What is this? I don't understand this. I mean, I do that. That's 3/4 of my day. Nicole says I should be out there like going to classes and talking to people and going to happy hours. It's kind of an ongoing joke. There's a lot of different hats I wear in my role, but one of them is also business development. Because again, all this doesn't do us any good unless we're convincing you guys to send us closing.
Can you put Into the prior slide, I'll go quickly check on the phone, just so she can see it, too, if you're contingency yourself. Oh, this is the one, yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, you weren't in the room at the time. Right, so this says basically, the property, the buyer's obligation is contingent on the sale of their current home.
Okay.
That's really what this says, and then the next slide, the kickout says. But if I get another offer, I'm putting it back to you, and you either have a choice, you can either waive this contingency, right? Or I can cancel the contract, or you get your money back, you'll still get your money back. But I'm not gonna sit around and wait for you to sell your own house if I got an offer that wants to make it.
So what's what's an acceptable timeframe? Is it totally dependent on the seller, like, I mean,
Yeah.
trying to sell their house?
It's, again, yeah, there was one clause in here that said. Oh, right here, buyer's property is or is not presently for sale. Right, if I'm a seller. And they say it's not under contract, I'm thinking, I don't know, what does that mean? I mean, are we gonna be waiting 3 months for them to even get a contract?
Yeah, the price.
Right, or are you basically, or have you already got it and it's scheduled to close next month? Right, I mean, there's,
They don't hold and install it.
Yeah. So I mean, I would base a lot on that, right?
Okay.
And then again, if the buyer's sale, the buyer's property does not.
Well, if it's
close
under
by-
contract, then you have
And
an
the
idea
seller,
what it's
and the
gonna
seller might even ask for the contract.
Yeah.
of-
They might want to see proof. That's exactly right. Now, if they ever do, and you're a buyer's agent, you may say, yeah, that's fine. But make sure that you white out, I would white out the address, and I would white out the buyer's names. And the real estate number, because there's certain things that are just private that, again, now you're giving a contract between your buyer. When they're selling their property to somebody else, and you're gonna divulge. Like this transaction over here to somebody else completely different, I'd be real careful about that.
Right.
So you could black out like the names and that kind of stuff, and the address, anything that kind of identifies.
How
who
they
they-
know it's you selling.
I don't know. I'd say, at some point, there's gotta be at some point, like everything else, there's a certain amount of trust and a certain amount of flexibility you gotta have in every single deal.
The question now that we're moving to the part of our contracts, are all the extension, the addendums that we're using currently, are these out of the question? There are new forms?
Yeah, they won't be.
They're all gonna be.
They're all, yeah, you're not gonna be able to use the NEFAR forms, you're not gonna be able to access them. In Form Simplicity or through NEFAR or for anybody else, you're not gonna be able to get them. So you're not gonna be able to use them. And again, and if you've saved them and you still wanna use them, I don't know, I wouldn't use them. NEFAR, I mean, there should be. Where was our list of? Yeah,
Here.
see, we got them.
Spend a month.
Start up with the new
Well, I
form.
did.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Been studying the old contracts and reading them like for hours on end, so I'm still.
Condo writer assumptions.
Yeah.
They're not listed, it's not listed on here. But I'm sure that we have extension amendments, I'm sure we have an general amendment form. I'm sure we have a, they have different things here, again, a backup contract, sale of buyer's property.
Whoever's gonna be eating when I have it with the, what's. it's supposed to be.
But I'm sure that still, even though they're not addendum, they're not part of the contract that you add to the contract at the very beginning.
Right.
I'm sure we still have amendments under FAR. They may even have something like the extension of it, which I thought was the
Yeah.
best form they ever had, because all you gotta do is say, oh, we're extending the period until blank, and everybody signs it. Right. So I'm sure that they have those in there. It's funny you say that. Now that I think about it, I haven't even looked that up to see where those documents are. But we will. But again, extension amendment, there's probably a repair agreement in there. I'm trying to think what else they may have that might be also. Cause see, these are things when we say an addendum. What's the difference between an addendum and an amendment? Do you know what it is? Well, an amendment, you amend the contract, right? You amend something that's already in place, right? You change it. Addenda is literally you add something to the contract. So again, these are things you add to the contract up front. Right, some of them you can actually do later on if you wanted to, but most of these are just initialed also. A lot of them aren't even signed documents, like the one we just looked at, the backup contract and the kickout, those are just initial. Oh, the other big thing to remember, and we didn't have this in the slideshow, but I always make a point of it. Fire bar, you have to initial, everybody has to initial every single page. Every single page is about.
I saw that.
And that's one of those things, and the reason NEFAR never did is they said, well, people miss it all the dang time. But now with DocuSign, it should be different. I mean, with DocuSign, you shouldn't be able to miss every page, any page at all, but they have to initial at the bottom of all the buyers and all the sellers have to initial at the bottom. Well, it just means, I don't know why, there might have been another one that was under, and they always had, say there was another one that was I, then it became, irrelevant, it became, became non-applicable. So rather than changing interest bearing then to I, they just kept interest bearing as J, just so, because everybody's used to it, they just called those reserves.
So maybe they'll put another one soon.
Yeah, the new one will be, like, the new one, like I in the future might be, acknowledgement of paying buyers commission. Right, so it might be something like that, seller's acknowledgement of paying buyers commission. Or something along those lines, they may have one of those forms.
There's a lot of unknowns coming up.
They are, and then again, Florida Realtors and NAR and everybody else, I mean, they're all scrambling trying to figure this one out. You know,
You make up a form in form simplicity?
what,
You make up a form in form simplicity, and send it to a buyer, I have them fill out and send back.
I don't know, I've never done one, form simplicity. I'll make up form, I make up forms for people all the
I'd have to
time.
get the-
I mean, that's just a branding thing, yeah, no. That doesn't affect the validity of the contract. The contract is an agreement
Right.
between the seller and the buyer. And that they both signed, and that's the agreement. It doesn't matter whether the broker's logo is on or not. I mean,
It has to be approved by the broker.
oh yeah, but I mean, that doesn't affect it. I mean, it affects you as the agent. You should only be using the broker's approved forms, but it doesn't affect what's between the seller and the buyer. They can sign,
Sure.
I mean, they can sign a one page as investors do. I don't know if you guys deal with investors.
And Henry, yeah,
Yeah, a lot of investors use a 2-page contract. Well, it's valid. There's nothing that makes it invalid. It's just that they use like a little 2-page. I'm gonna buy it for this amount of money and I got 20 days to inspect it and we're gonna close and here's what we're gonna do. And it's just like that simple. So the reason these are so complicated is they take into consideration like a lot of
there's all that.
federal laws and all these potential things that could happen. And if this happens, here's how we're gonna handle it. Instead of just kind of like a little,
It's more protected, where I feel it's more protected for both the buyer and the seller.
Right.
It's their own place of residency, so.
right, and it's a fair contract on both sides. If I was to send you a contract, and again, like say for a commercial property that I prepare, like my lawyer commercial property. Although my contract, I think is probably pretty fair to both sides, because I don't want to renegotiate it. I don't want to like have it like so skewed to the seller. That the buyer has to come back in and if they have another lawyer look at it, make 27 changes to it. I want them to say, oh yeah, this is reasonable. These are all reasonable to both sides, right? And everybody should already know what's in them. So you don't really have to renegotiate all the little detail things. You don't have to read for detail as delivery of title, and then survey requirements and this kind of stuff. They're all standard. But if you got individual little contracts, they can have all sorts of who knows what hidden things in them, So.
Yeah.
Interesting. We're done, and everybody on Zoom, thank you very much for being patient with me. I didn't do my Zoom as well as I should have. I should have been looking at you guys the whole time and making jokes, but I apologize. But we're doing good. You guys can call me on anything and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Are you going to be doing more content